in those who eat sad diet or carb eaters or the cholesterol glycated and oxidized, which, well, the glycation is, it depends on the threshold of the carbs coming in. So at a certain threshold, you're not going to get much glycation, and it's usually the body can, because remember, your endothelial cells are actually turning over, like your gut cells, they turn over far more rapidly than any other cells in the body. So those structures are continually renewed and turned over. So in that regard, they can take a hit and then get repaired. It's the excessive hits which becomes the problem. Even in the mitochondria, we're still getting some level of oxidation. Just living, we're going to create some reactive oxygen species inside the mitochondria just by utilizing sugar or fat, and at the basic level, at the electron chain, you're still going to basically create some reactive oxygen species. And that's where taurine, species-appropriate type, furnishes taurine, supports those enzymatic pathways that then upregulate melatonin all day long inside the mitochondria, and they do their repair work. And taurine actually reduces the oxidative stress inside the mitochondria from the stuff being produced as a consequence. So we don't really have to worry about a lot of these things as long as we're not overloading our body with glycating factors. Obviously, fructose being the worst because it's 7 times more glycating. And if you're engaging the Randle cycle, it can get up to 10 times. So that's where your problem lies. Somebody like a vegan doing a glucose, like a potato diet or that, their glycation is going to be way lower than somebody like Paul Saladino doing honey. The threshold of glycation is going to be way higher. And it already shows in his face. He looks older than me and he's younger than me. His skin looks old. And I have a few cheats now and then, and my skin still looks better than his skin. And I've done far more damage in my life with cardiovascular disease in my 40s and stuff like that than he ever did. So I should still technically look worse just from all the damage of decades and decades that I did, because I've only had about a bit over a decade now to recover, but still I look way better, even though I'm, more than 10 years older than him, because he's in his mid, from what I believe, mid 40s, and I'm in my late 50s. So, I'm 2 years away from 60. That just tells you how damaging fructose can be and glycating. So we don't want that. Obviously, oils that are rancid and damaged can oxidize, but so can, sugar can attach and actually increase the oxidative damage as well through the glycation process. So all these things can actually really make things really bad. Sad dieters are actually worse because they end up, due to the Randle cycle, they end up pushing more of those factors, fats and sugars, into the bloodstream, not allowing them to come in into the cells at a much more normal pace. There is another component to it. There is I've recently discussed it with Pim on her channel and with the videos that she's going to make and all that. I also view that what we call the Randle cycle, and it's probably why it never became very popular, even though it is absolute, where insulin resistance is a construct which explains a whole lot of physiological processes, but the Randle cycle is actually a real thing that actually does happen inside cells. The only difference is the gradient. And the gradient, I believe, and this is where I make a sort of a different nuance than many other people, the gradient is determined by what I call the effects of deuterium in the diet. So if you've got, in those folds, the inner mitochondrial membrane, so you've got, those folds where all the electron chains are and all the ATPase at the bottom. Well, more of those machinery damage, and that's when large parts of the mitochondria become dysfunctional as you go along. So the efficiency of the cell to take in more energy drops over time. That's why it becomes senescent. And that's due to deuterium damage over a certain length of time. The more of the cells in the body are becoming senescent and damaged and can take in less energy, what's going to happen to the gradient? At the same volume of food, the gradient is going to be a hell of a lot higher. This is why in the past, in the 1960s and 50s, people were on mixed diets. But in the younger age, they were much thinner. There were also all the actual foods that were being cooked were in lard and tallow. In particular, tallow, like McDonald's were producing tallow and all that. Well, what does stearic acid and also palmitate do? Palmitic acid. It causes reverse electron transport. It actually encourages the mitochondria to produce more mitochondria, to do biogenesis of more mitochondria, which means that you actually even lower the threshold of, you're not only not damaging those mitochondria because you're taking in those animal food, fats, to oxidize, but also you're encouraging more mitochondria to be produced to reduce the gradient of the Randle cycle even further. That is why you only see fat people in older age, back in the 50s and 60s and all that, because it takes decades and decades of slow mitochondrial decline to get to that stage where they have less efficiency in dealing with mixed substrates. Where now we're doing it in the womb practically, because we're poisoning the children. We're doing far more mitochondrial damage, and that is why we're seeing childhood cancers and all these things happening and escalating, and people becoming morbidly obese in younger and younger age brackets, because it's the old similar to the Pottinger's cat, but that was related to taurine, but it's similar for us in terms of mitochondrial dysfunction from one generation to another. And so the capacity for the cell to basically deal with mixed substrates is becoming less and less efficient with each generation. So it's amplifying the gradient over the coming generations as they're getting more and more damaged at the mitochondrial level. So that's why I look at the past and I look today and I can explain the difference and why it takes longer. It took longer in the past on a mixed to get, because you were getting lower gradient of inflammation and lower gradient of this decline, where in our sort of situation, it's much quicker and all that. And it also describes the Egyptians, because the Egyptians were doing the same thing the modern people are doing. They were on like a 70% carbohydrate diet and very low fat. And so they were all had, man boobs and big tummy bellies and all that. And they actually created their own statues of that. If people have seen some of that. And it's exactly the consequence of damaging their mitochondria at a much younger and younger age. And that's why they got conquered so many freaking times. They got owned and conquered by so many people. Why? Because they were less healthy with each generation and became unable to basically resist the local empires in the region, which consumed more animal foods than they did.